live on the Ohio Bible Institute podcast, episode number 2, and we're glad you've joined us. You know the reason we do these podcasts are to resource our churches and get the information out to them to help them be better at ministering to themselves and ultimately the community, because we want to reach people for Christ. And we ask 2 questions here at the OBI. We want to know what the Bible says, and we want to apply it to our lives. And so today we have a special guest, a friend of mine, Brother Tony Walker. So Tony, it's good to have you today.
Good to be here, Ben.
Yeah, man. So this is exciting because we're actually going to put into application some of the things that we want to do. So today you're actually the first real guest we've had, beside Dad and I, to come into the podcast, because we saw some statistics recently. You just attended the men's retreat for Ohio. So first, tell us about that. You know, the fellowship. Tell the people that maybe weren't able to be there some things you saw at the men's retreat. And I mean, we saw the Spirit move. We had some people saved.
Yeah,
but just
that was
talk about the
amazing.
men's retreat for like 30 seconds, and then we'll get into why.
Sure, yeah. So just, I guess, briefly, and again, thank you so much for having me in here, Ben. It's been definitely great to get to know you further, and really the work I think that OBI is doing is awesome, and really point on for what we need. But yeah, so there at the church that I pastor, Lewis Center Free Will Baptist, we've actually been involved in mental health ministry for quite a few years now. Actually, long before some of the statistics that we're seeing have come out and really come to light, I guess, so to speak. But what we found is people are needing support and they're needing encouragement, but they're not finding that in secular paths. So the folks that we've been talking to and ministering to have been really searching for something that truly can make a true change in their journey as people. So, you know, I was privileged to be able to join the retreat here this last year and really enjoyed the time that I had there. The fellowship there with the other fellows was great. Listened to some really wonderful, I think, different viewpoints on how to approach some things. I think was really great. But a couple of the statistics that were, you know, I think really spot on with what we're seeing, unfortunately, from a mental health perspective. And the ministry that, I guess, again, that we've started with, apologize, I'll go back, and the fact that early on we were touched in our congregation with mental illness. And again, I don't believe in coincidence. I believe God does things for a reason. So, you know, again, being exposed to that, I really quickly had to learn because I was not equipped. As a young pastor at that time, I was about 35, 36, about 20 some years ago now, but I was not equipped for what God brought in the door, which that did a couple things, right? Number one, it's like, okay, where can I point you? Because I can't deal with this, or at least felt inadequate. And then the other thing was, okay, how do I make sure that I walk with you through that? So I found 2 things. Number one is this: God doesn't present something without presenting opportunity and being able to provide for that opportunity. So God put me on a path of being able to help support others. Because what I found was when I tried to seek help for this individual from a quote unquote Christian perspective, the outlets and the sources that I saw, they claimed to be Christian, but they weren't using the Bible.
Yeah.
It was all secular tactics, all secular viewpoints, all secular methods, but there was no Bible. They may say a prayer here and there, but there was no Bible.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, the individual that I was working with was very faith-based, and wanted God's viewpoint on their recovery. So that really, they entrusted themselves, and the Lord entrusted them to me. So from that perspective, then that sort of, again, started me on that journey of, okay, how can I help you? Which then led me to some further education, some further work that I had sort of already started, but it built that foundation. So back to the retreat, again, fast forward to the retreat, the statistics that we're seeing are actually just as alarming as what we're seeing in the real world outside of the church.
Crazy, because I mean, let's talk about, before we get into the mental health thing, is divorce.
Yeah.
Divorce is the same in the church as in outside the world. So is suicide. So is, I mean, you just name it. There's really no difference. And that's, as a pastor, that's staggering because we're talking about the gospel, what the gospel does. And there are people who I wonder about their true life change. And that's another podcast for another day, right?
Right.
But I hope that those that are listening this is why I think you and I are going to be good friends, because when people ask me about discipleship, man, I just blow up. I mean, I'm like, yes, let's get into it. Let's talk about Bill Hall, Bill Putman, Ron Hunter, a DNA of D6, and those just boom, 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 just start putting those names out there. Then when people talk to you about mental health, you're the same way. Yeah, let's get into it. So there's these passions, and so that passion has just in the last 30 seconds been shown, and I think people are saying, man, this guy's like all in this thing. So I'm looking forward to this episode as we continue on. So, so in the statistics that we saw at the men's retreat, not only are those, there's no differences, but mental health is one of those. And society, if you got to get on any kind of news broadcast or search, it doesn't take long searching the internet. Mental health is a huge issue.
Yes.
From kids to adults.
Yes.
So let's do something. Let's pause and let's back up just a second. Tell people, you talked about the church, you talked about where you're from. Okay, so tell people the journey you took as far as, all right, here's a need, here's where you went to get ready. Like you said, you did some education things. Let's talk about that. What did you do to get ready to talk about what we're getting ready to talk about?
Sure, absolutely. So again, I had a personal experience, again, with mental illness from a direct family association. So that's sort of, I think, again, God plowed the field, right? He sort of got the soil ready for what he wanted. And that was young. But later on, I had this calling that I've been called into the ministry at 18 years old, was called into the ministry at 18 years old while I was in the Marine Corps, started then in the ministry. Not long after that, just dealing through some of the things that we've dealt with from a family perspective led me towards counseling. So with that, I went ahead and got a Bachelor of Arts in Biblical Counseling. Again, my passion, of course, for the ministry and for the Lord, I didn't want to do anything outside Scripture. So with that, that led me to a biblical seminary where I received a Bachelor of Arts in Biblical Counseling so I could keep Bible-based in what I was teaching. And from there, they get onto temperament theory, they get into personality disorders and different things, of course. So I sort of stayed there for a while and used that in my pastoring, because by that time I was getting into pastoring and was actually working with youth, working in youth ministry and things like that, which was great because I was seeing that education being used, because I was really talking, and Lord opened doors to a lot of opportunities to talk with teens and with kids from a pediatric level was struggling with mental illness. And not necessarily diagnoses per se, but actually just struggling with mental health. I don't know what to do with my anger. I feel angry. I feel frustrated. Things are not good at home. How do I deal with this? And so the Lord was opening these doors. Well, a little bit later on, God then pointed me to a young organization at that time, the American Association of Christian Counselors. And they started doing a lot of work in the coaching field, which is sort of just blowing up right now. And unfortunately, I will say unfortunately, because of COVID, that has actually caused a lot of that, because we've seen a huge spike in isolationism, loneliness, depression, anxiety, everything that went with us being locked down for years. And unfortunately, we can run all the models in the world we want, but until we actually experience or see something like that, we don't know how people are going to react. And unfortunately, the general population reacted negatively to those situations. Even when you have online, even when you have virtual, we know from the Bible, God made us sensual beings, meaning that he gave us senses, sight, hearing. Well, one of those is touch. And we've come to find out that, everybody is so big on virtual church, right? Everybody wants to look at it on live. Everybody wants to see it online. But the thing is, we're not built that way. We're actually built to have a face-to-face conversation. We're built to be able to reach out and put our hand on somebody's shoulder, to be able to shake their hand.
Since the beginning.
Exactly,
Adam
since
and
the
Eve.
very beginning. When you look at God and Adam in the Garden of Eden, they had that close relationship, and ever since that's been broken by sin, we crave that. It's in our DNA. We're built that way. So with that, that's why we understand mental health is a huge part of our life. Now, with that education that we've gotten through AACC, God led us down a coaching journey, not necessarily into clinical counseling, clinical, making diagnoses and prescribing medications. There are others that are called to that. I was never called to that. I was called to be that individual that God has blessed me with, to be able to sit down and build a relationship with someone, have a relationship with someone, and be able to help them, point them to either resources that are needed, that are very necessary if there's something acute or critical going on there, to be able to point them to that, but at the same time, journey with that person. Because most of the people that we find, again, back to your statistics, 80% of people are depressed. Why are they depressed? When you get to the root of a lot of that, it's loneliness. It's the fact that we live in a very segmented, fragmented society.
Sure.
And unfortunately, that's what we've done in the Western Hemisphere. Back to the biblical application of this, we in the Western society, in the Western Hemisphere, unfortunately, we live in what's called a compartmentalized viewpoint. What we do is we go to church on Sunday, and then on Monday through Saturday, we live a totally different world.
Oh, yeah.
And as long as I'm okay on Sunday or Wednesday night or Sunday night, then my walk with God is good. But Monday through Saturday, I'm doing this. I got my job, I got my family, I got my career, I got my athletics, my extracurricular,
Yeah.
and we try to live a separated life. We're not built that way.
I think too, and I'm not an expert at all on this, but it's like you live a life at church, you live a life at work, and then you live a life
That's
in the
right.
virtual world. So it's almost like three different worlds.
That's right.
These kids and adults.
Yes.
Will, I saw a guy talking about, is at the ministry,
Mhm.
talking about selfies.
Yes.
And they'll take 100 selfies,
Yes.
and they'll pick this one, and they'll put these filters
right.
on it, and they'll say, "This is the real me."
That's right.
And they may not think that they're cheating on their spouse, but they enjoy somebody saying, "Oh, you're beautiful,"
Hmm.
because their spouse doesn't tell them. I was thinking, we were talking about Adam and Eve, and this came to me while I was talking. It was interesting that after the sin, how quickly those two went at each other. It was his fault.
Yes.
Or her fault,
Yes.
right?
Exactly.
And then you get to Cain, and the Lord says to Cain in chapter 4, verse 6 of Genesis, "Why are you wroth? Why are you angry? Why is your countenance fallen?" He was depressed.
That's right.
He was
Exactly.
I mean, just
That quickly.
listen,
That quickly.
I'm of the opinion, okay, and I may be wrong, so throw your Bible at me if
Yep.
I'm wrong. Okay? Okay. I think that Satan hit Adam and Eve like immediately
Absolutely.
because they didn't have kids until after the garden. Everything before the garden was perfect. God wanted them to be fruitful and multiply.
That's
I
right.
think almost day one, Satan went in there and hit them. And then it wasn't until after the garden that he knew his wife and they had kids.
Mhm.
Because Satan understood that if they had kids, and then like Cain and Abel, let's say
Mhm.
that they were perfect, and then Adam and Eve sinned, God would have to kill Adam and Eve because, right, it was a whole big mess. And I don't know if Satan understood everything that was going on,
Mhm.
but it was immediately he went after that relationship with each other.
Exactly.
And immediately sin started to get out.
See-
So it's probably, and again, I'm not a doctor, it all comes back to really people are relying on so many other things rather than Christ. Now, you and I
Yeah.
can say that because we're pastors.
Yeah.
We say people, you need Christ. Well, in order to get them the help they need,
Mhm.
there is a journey. Just like God took you on the journey to where you're at now to help people, and God took me on a journey through my life to be here to be able to do this.
Mhm.
God's got to take some people who are, I hate the word sick, but they're
Yeah.
sick. And discouragement, loneliness, and they've got to take them on that journey. So that's your passion. That's obviously throwing up in your mind. I guess that's an awful way to say it, but it
Yeah.
just explodes in your mind.
Yes.
How can I help these individuals? And we'll get to the pastors in just a minute, but really focusing in on the needs. So you said something interesting. You said, there's two types of ways of helping people. There's the prescription world out there. There are people who are professionals who do that. That's not what you do.
No.
So you said the word coaching multiple times. So
That's
talk
right.
through really what that is, and then we'll come back and talk about the American counseling group that you're with and all that. We'll talk through that and how you play that. And then we'll talk. Well, I want to bring in the pastors in the end because that's
Yeah.
where we're going to kind of start.
Sure.
So
Absolutely.
talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so really, and I think you hit a very interesting point because that's the point that I want to get at, because that's the difference between counseling and coaching. When you look at counseling basically looks at the past and how it's affecting now, right? These are some of the things, these are some of the markers or some of the things that actually have impacted me to a point to where I see this in my world, and this is my world today. This is how I'm relating to my world today through my lens. which has been affected by these things that have happened, right? So whether it be trauma, whether it be abuse, whether it be even a good life, whatever, all of those things, all of those outside stressors affect us. There's nothing we go through in this life that does not affect us. So unfortunately, all of those things, of course, they come in and they affect us. And this is how we're looking at our world, is through the lens that we have. Now, you hit an interesting point, and I want to touch that for just a second because it's a huge point. When you look at the Garden of Eden, and you look at what Satan was doing, Satan's role in that area and in that moment was to disrupt the relationship between God and man. That is the whole point. The whole point is we must have a relationship with God. We're not talking about religious symbolism here. We're not talking about going in and doing a list of check it off. Okay, I tithe, check it off. I sing in the choir, check it off. I go to church 3 times a week, check it off. I'm good. That's not what God is asking for, and that's not what we need. What we need is an actual relationship. What Jesus was saying when he said, seek ye first the kingdom of heaven and its righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you, is a very simple statement about the principle of a relationship, which is in the fact, unless we have that relationship with God, which is in our DNA, He wired us for this from the very beginning, unless we find that fulfilling relationship with God and actually have a relationship with God where we're walking with God, we will seek everything else to fill that vacuum, which is what people do. Satan understood that to a point to when he disrupted the relationship between God and man. The very first thing that man did, again, we can see the fall already, because the very first thing that they did, which is human nature, is to isolate and divide. Where God, when we go through a traumatic event or we go through an event that causes a crisis in our faith, God wants us to come to Him.
Yeah.
He wants unity.
Yeah.
He wants healing. He wants recovery and reconciliation. Satan doesn't. Satan wants isolation. Satan wants loneliness. Satan wants tearing down everything God is trying to build in that individual. Those are the things that we see. Now, back to a point, and this is why I think this is a great collaboration, because my thing and what sent me down the whole path on this journey was the fact that I had people sitting in my congregation that felt that they could not be Christians because they had a mental illness. They felt that they could not approach God because they suffered from anxiety. And so with that, I had to help them and walk with them through that journey to help them realize that God may not take that anxiety, but that doesn't make you less of a Christian. You can still have a relationship with Christ even though you have a diagnosis. And that was the whole difference. That's where God put me at, is walking with these people. And that's what coaching is. Coaching is walking with them, mentoring them, helping them to understand. It's discipling in a mental world. It's helping them to realize we are holistic beings. And with the spiritual comes the mental and comes the psychological and comes the physical. But Ben, we're whole beings. We've got to treat all of that.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's medicinal things we've got to do. Sometimes there's things we've got to do to understand who we are. Yeah. But we have to have that spiritual application. And that was the vacuum that I found whenever I had that young individual come to me. I need help. And I found that there was a spiritual vacuum. There was no one that was wanting to address truly the spiritual aspect of the relationship that they needed restored with God, and that they could actually have a restored, fruitful relationship and still take a pill. Because they thought there was something wrong with their faith, because they went to other pastors, they went to other preachers that told them, well, because you're taking a pill, you're not praying right. Because you're taking a pill, your faith is weak.
Yeah, I've heard
That's
that.
garbage.
Yeah, it's garbage.
You look at what the Lord said in 1 Kings chapter 19. Elijah himself went and hid in a cave from his depression, and God Himself recovered him.
That's right. That's true. He needed help.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Jonah.
Yes,
depressed.
Jonah
And he's-
made a bad choice. And what happened? He ended up found himself in the belly of a ship trying to hide and sleep it off because he made a bad choice.
I got to look. Wasn't it at the end of the story? I have to just confirm. Didn't the Lord tell him that you need to eat?
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes it's just eating.
You've got to do the physical things.
That's
Self-care is huge.
Oh,
And that's why we see such a problem, I think, in the pastoral world, in the ministry world. Because so many times you go back to the book of Mark where the woman with the issue of blood, right?
Yeah.
Came out and touched Jesus, touched the hem of a garment. And he said, and the Bible says virtue went out of him. A lot of times when we're helping others, when we're ministering to others, that takes something out of us. It takes something out. And if we don't take care of ourselves, we're going to find ourselves depleted. The tank's going to be empty.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, pastors, I love them to death because I've been one for years and years and years. I love pastors to death. But one of the problems that we have, and I'm just gonna say this, and you can throw your book at me if you want. We have a pride issue.
Oh,
we have a pride issue. We have an issue thinking that we've got to do it all, that we got to be super people.
Have you read, and I'll plug it, The Dangerous Calling?
I have not yet. I've got it on my list. I got to get it.
He talks about that.
Yeah.
He said that his pride is what kept him from.
Yes.
And
so many people.
Yeah, and
it keeps them from truly finding victory.
Yeah, there's, I've got some pride. Like, I am who I am. I love my family. I love my pastor, Tim at Heritage. I love my pastor from North Carolina. There's pride in who we are, but the pride that he was talking about, it becomes sin because it blocks us from going through.
Exactly.
Guys, well, I'll put it to you another way. My pastor in North Carolina used to say this. He says it in a sermon he preaches. And in the staff meetings, he would tell us almost every week, men, you got to be holy. You got to do what's right. Because if David could fall, a man after God's own heart, all of us could fall. And what he was saying is there are men in the Bible who struggled.
Mm-hmm.
Men in the Bible,
absolutely.
When you read David in Psalm 102, I mean, obviously it's because of his sin.
Sure.
But he says, Lord, I need you to hear me now. It's almost like a child saying, Daddy.
That's right.
Mommy.
Exactly. Exactly.
He says, please, I need to see you. I need you because my body's withering away. I'm consuming. He says, I don't even want to eat.
Right.
I look at it like at a funeral. Somebody's stirring the fork in the potatoes because they're discouraged. He said, I'm an owl in the desert, a pelican in the wilderness. I'm out of place.
Yes.
I don't fit.
That's right.
And this, you can see the mental of this.
Yes.
But then as you look at this first 11 verses, he says, man, I'm going to die.
Yes.
And life is over, but all of that is focused on me.
That's right.
Me.
That's right.
Verse 12 says, but you, O Lord, are on the throne.
That's right.
And from heaven you hear our prayers. So the journey that you're talking about is lovingly, compassionately saying to someone, you can get help. But the end result of this help, whether you have to take a pill or whether you have to see a doctor or whether, that's fine.
Yeah.
But the goal is to get you
back
to the Lord.
That's right.
100%.
That's right.
And so, I don't think anybody's going to doubt your passion in this thing. It's coming out. That's great. But the shepherding pastor part of you is you're saying, I want to guide these people back to the Lord. So let's just talk about something interesting because you've talked about the passage a few times. So let's just go on in there. All right. Let's see the Spirit's leading this. All right. Pastors are lonely because they choose to be.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
They don't date their wives anymore.
Right.
A lot of them. I said not all of them, but a lot of them they just don't date their wives. I'm going on a date tonight with my wife.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't, almost 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, her best friend went to eternity, passed away. And today's that day. And so, hey, let's go to dinner tonight.
Yeah.
Let's spend some time together.
That's
guys
awesome.
Guys don't do that.
That's
anymore. Right. They spend all their time at work.
Mm-hmm.
They never spend time with their family. And so but then, and they never spend time together as pastors. You and I hung out here at the office a few times at the men's retreat.
Yep.
Hey, man, what's going on? We've talked, we've laughed, we've fixed things that we've worked on. That fellowship there is just good to be with other
That's right.
I got some guys coming today to do another podcast.
Yeah.
But just fellowship. Tomorrow night, I'm going to Southern Ohio to a conference, and then that evening, I've got a friend down there. We're going to go to dinner.
Mm-hmm.
We're just going to go hang out as
Exactly.
pastors. Why? Because we got to have that.
That's right.
Because there's some loneliness and there's depression. So talk about this for a second. How much of that is self-inflicted versus medical? Now that you can't give the true statistic on that, but it's got to be there. There has to be some of this has to be self-inflicted.
I would say because again, and again, your point is very well taken because that's one of the issues that we've ran into at our congregation. We do have people who have an inherited, unfortunately, biological anomaly, whether it be a chemical imbalance or whether it be some other issue that causes symptoms that are exhibited or displayed through mental illness.
Yeah.
There's nothing you can do with that. Okay. Now, and I'm going to say, you're going to have those people that'll throw songbooks at me that say, well, you can pray and believe and God will totally heal them. Mm-hmm. We're talking about genetic anomalies, DNA, something's wrong with some chromosomes.
Yes.
Does that make them any less of a Christian than you or I that doesn't have, example, schizophrenia?
Yeah.
Does it make them any less of an individual who may have true genetically incurred anxiety
Mhm.
versus somebody who doesn't.
Mhm.
Again, you go back to what the Lord said, and the Lord very clearly told Moses, very clearly in the book of Exodus. He tells us that I will visit the iniquity of your fathers on the third and fourth generation. There are some things that are passed down,
Mhm.
regardless, folks. We live in a universal sin creation. Unfortunately, this is a fallen world.
So let's talk about that, because there may be somebody that's lost that's
Hmm.
listening to this podcast. They may find it on YouTube because they see mental health. They may
Hmm.
see that. Okay.
Sure.
So universal sin. What is okay? Everybody's a sinner.
Everybody.
The
Everybody.
gospel says that we've all fallen short. We've all missed the mark. There's no preacher that's better than you.
That's right.
I mean, we are all sinners, right?
That's right.
But because of sin, there's a curse.
That's right.
And that's why we have cancer.
Yeah.
That's why there's AIDS. That's why there's a flu. That's why
Exactly.
there's COVID.
Exactly.
Also, that's why there's mental health,
That's right.
chemical imbalances, and some people have it and some people don't.
Right.
And the Lord has graciously given us tools to know how to help some people.
That's right.
And there are divine interventions that
Yep.
we believe in, but also He's given us the ability to do things.
That's
there are
right.
doctors who do heart transplants.
That's
and,
right.
and work on the brain and all those
Mhm.
things. God's given us that knowledge. Well, He's given us knowledge to help people in mental health world too.
Exactly.
And we want to do that, right?
Yeah.
So
See,
that's awesome, man.
Yeah, and that's unfortunately, and you hit a great point, because when people look at I need a heart cath,
Mhm.
I've got a blockage.
Yeah.
They have no qualms with
Mhm.
going to their cardiologist and saying, "Okay, go ahead and do what you need to do, take care of my blockage."
Yeah.
No issue. Nobody looks at them differently. Nobody talks about them differently. Nobody says anything differently about them because they needed a heart cath. But somebody comes at you and says, "I'm really depressed." And all of a sudden, that stigma that is there, that exists, unfortunately, in our church just as much as it does in society,
Mhm.
that stigma that person is mentally ill, all of a sudden, get away.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's how people act.
Yeah.
And we may not say that, but folks, it's how we act.
Mhm.
And again, what did Jesus tell us, right? It's not what that comes into us defiles us, it's what comes out.
Sure.
And unfortunately, he was talking about the nature of our heart.
Mhm.
So what comes out is the nature of our heart. So I go back for just a second because I want to touch on this, because you made a very good point in the fact that, we'll look at this and we'll say, okay, men do this, men do this, men do this.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, sometimes we want the grocery list. We want somebody to look at me and say, okay, go get the broccoli, go get the asparagus, go do this, go do this, go do this. And as long as I can check that off, I'm good. But that's not what Jesus said.
Yeah.
What Jesus said, again, is if you got the relationship right, if you got the ship righted, if you're in a true relationship, all of that stuff's going to take care of itself. You're going to do those things, not because somebody tells you to, but you're going to do them because you want to.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? And that's the difference, because again, that's where I believe that we really need to understand when we're talking about disciple making, we're not making disciples. God makes the disciples. God is doing the disciple making, and that's built out of a loving, right relationship, a journey that we're going down the path with God, like Adam did in the very beginning, walking through the garden in the cool of the day, right? Having that journey, walking side by side.
Sure.
And sometimes we get stuck on the legalistic side of things where we think, I got to do this, I got to do this, I got to do this. And as long as I do those things, I'm good. But that's not the case. We don't have a works-based salvation. It is truly a faith, but that faith builds a relationship that we have with God. That fellowship is restored, back to your point on fellowship. That fellowship is restored that's been lost.
Yeah.
We can then have that relationship. And what I submit is the fact that many times what you're talking about, men dating their wives again, pastors getting together,
Oh, yeah.
all of these retreats, all of these things that we do, what is that? That is trying to organically build relationship. We need to restore the relationships that have been broken.
All right. So let's pause and let's just be blunt for a second.
Sure.
The line in the sand. What are the current statistics for pastors and mental health that you know?
Unfortunately, they're not good.
Yeah.
You mentioned it already, and unfortunately, they're not good. So we look at society again. You made the mention at the top of the time that we have together that unfortunately inside the church looks like outside the church,
Mhm.
and that's true of mental illness. It's true of mental health. Unfortunately, 80% of people, whether it's in the church or out of the church, will be diagnosed with depression or anxiety in our society.
80%.
80%, and that's right now. It's continuing to climb. Out of that, self-injury, whether fatal or non-fatal, and we're talking suicide, unfortunately, is increasing over 20% now in almost every demographic. We see pornographic use actually climbing at alarming rates, and believe it or not, the most attacked group right now is young women. Young women are becoming the most, I guess, the biggest group of consumers of pornographic material. Again, looking for relationship.
Sure, they've been taught that that's the wrong kind of relationship, and I'm not plugging a specific movie, but the Sound of Freedom. They were talking about the true story that Jim Caviezel played. $150 billion industry in the child sex world, and they say, well, that'll never happen. But these kids don't realize the slavery they're putting themselves in.
That's right.
So 80%. So that's society. So here's what that tells me: they're in your church.
Oh, they're all over your church.
So okay. So some of the sheep are sick.
Yes.
All right. Does mental depression spread like other diseases?
No, it is not contagious. It is not contagious. However,
It can bring people
it can bring people down around you, right? Because again, we're connected, right? God built us to be connected. We're connected in those relationships. So if I'm down, absolutely. If I surround myself with negativity, if that's my constant thing, then I'm going to be negative. No matter what I do, at some point, I will find myself looking at things, thinking about things, viewing things from a negative perspective. Again, you go back to what the book of Proverbs teaches us. Iron sharpens iron. What that principle means is I need to surround myself with those things that are going to help me get to where I want to go. Now, nobody wants to be negative. Nobody wants to be depressed. Nobody wants to do these things, at least from a healthy perspective, right? But unfortunately, a lot of times misery loves company. So we'll find ourselves in a place where we're looking for things that help us sort of reflect how we feel. And unfortunately, that's what we surround ourselves. But what God is saying there is don't do that. Don't isolate yourself with those things that are dragging you down, so to speak, in this example, but actually find that brother, find that sister, find that individual that you can surround yourself that will bring in that truth, bring in that positive to you, that will help you work through that season that you're going through. Back to your question. Unfortunately, those are the statistics for actual congregation. When you look at pastoring and ministry, unfortunately, it's really bad there too.
Yeah.
We see that most pastors are walking away from pastorates or they're leaving pastorates because of loneliness. Loneliness has went up in 20% in the last couple of years. And that's where it was. And it wasn't healthy to begin with, but it's even worse now.
Probably hurt with COVID too.
Well, that's
40%
exactly
of your congregation.
Exactly.
And
Now again, back to your point, because this is a very good point that you brought up. And let's make a tie-in right here. Why would that be the case? Why would that reflect that if that truly be the case? Because when you have men, if you have people that are pouring themselves into their ministry to a rate to where if all of a sudden that ministry falls off and there's nothing they can do about it, you can't do nothing about mandates. You can't do nothing about lockdowns. You can't do nothing about those things. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, when that happened, you had people that was their whole life. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, it was their whole life.
That's right.
You see, did you catch what I said?
Yeah.
That was their life,
mm-hmm.
not God.
That's right.
Their work was their life.
It's interesting. Last year at the men's retreat, Jeff Manning from Unity Church in Greenville, he preached a sermon on Samson, and he talked about the miracles. Samson, the Holy Spirit came upon him. The Holy Spirit came upon him. So, but when he picked the door up, that's the only time that the Holy Spirit didn't come upon him. And he did it on his own power.
That's right.
Okay. And his question was, how often do we do ministry on our own power?
That's right.
So you and I picked up your personality, probably because both of us have a military background. I was in the Army, so I'm a little bit cooler than the Marines. I'm just kidding. But,
that's all right. One more, Lee.
Yeah,
that's
I know. It's funny. But my son, he got a recruitment card from the Marine Corps yesterday. And I opened up and said, "Hey, fill this out. You get a T-shirt." And he was like, "No." That's so awesome. They're so good.
Yeah.
But the whole idea was, you and I know that with our leadership background and we could pastor.
Oh, absolutely.
And do it.
Yeah.
We got sermons. We could. But if you don't do it with the Spirit and the Lord guiding you,
that's right.
You're not shepherding the people.
That's right.
So, and I say that to say part of shepherding is knowing the need. And if 80% of our people, and obviously when you say 80%, That's not every church
No,
at 80%.
no, not every
But
church.
that probably means that there are at least one or two in your church
That's right.
that have or are struggling with mental health or need help. Listen, I'll confess here just to give some guys some encouragement. There was a season in my life where just the last couple of years where I talked to someone. There was just a lot going on in our lives.
Mhm.
I mean, physically and emotionally and with work and everything. It was a lot. And I needed a brother that I could sit down with and say, look, I need help to put all this together.
Right.
And he guided me on some things. And man, it was awesome.
Yeah.
Because
Absolutely.
I had to get to that point where you got to get help
Mhm.
when you need it. So if anybody's listening to this thinking, man, I can't do that. Yeah, you can.
Yeah.
Because
Absolutely.
the only reason you know that is because I told you. You don't know who I talked to. You don't know that person. That person's not going to share with you. Everything was confidential. So it was one of those things where I needed to get the help that I needed, because if I didn't, I think I would have been brought down.
Right.
So I don't want to do that. So let me ask you another question. All right. So the statistics are bad for the people. The statistics are bad for the church. The statistics are bad for the pastors. Okay. How does a person recognize that someone has a need? Or we can ask another way. How does someone recognize they have a need themselves? Sometimes people don't know they're sick
Mhm.
or they'd have a need.
Mhm.
So what are some things that they can do to, first, you got to say, man, I'm not feeling well. Or, hey, are you okay? There's some warning signs, right?
Mhm.
And so how does somebody do that? Maybe a layman or a pastor with another pastor. How do they get those clues together to get somebody to recognize
Sure.
they need to start down that journey?
Sure.
Because after we're done with that, I'm going to ask you, well, what does this mean? Talk about your ministry.
Yep.
And also other things.
Absolutely.
So what are those things that they can do?
So the biggest thing, of course, someone walks in the back door, right? And they come in, and there may be some visible clues. Again, we know, especially being pastors, and talking to pastors and talking to a lot of different people, but it's no secret, and it's not a biblical secret. It is a biblical principle, but it is not a secret that 80% of our communication is nonverbal.
Mm-hmm.
So I can look at, I can look at you and I can pick up clues that are telling me what you're communicating without you ever opening your mouth.
Mm-hmm.
80% of that communication is nonverbal. So you're talking whether or not your mouth is actually opening. So we need to be, and I'm going to say this, we need to be intentional. Just because dear Sister Mabel walks in the back door every Sunday like she's done for the last 10 years, there may be something different about Sister Mabel today.
Mm-hmm.
We need to be intentional. Truly caring about someone, having a relationship with someone means I need to be intentional. I need to look and see. I need to actually take the time to not worry about whether or not the worship music is right, the right track is set, the right vocals are there, the right this is there, the right there, that is there. We need to actually do what we're called to do, which is shepherd. In order to shepherd, in order to realize I've got a lost lamb, I got to recognize the lamb is lost.
Yeah.
Which means I need to be intentional. I need to understand that there's something different,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's the whole point of that. There's something different. Something's not right. So be that pastor or be that lay member or be that individual, because maybe your pastor is super busy. Maybe you're whatever. Maybe you're a lay member. Maybe you're a deacon. Maybe you're somebody else in the congregation that really feels a passion for people. And you see dear Sister Mabel walk in the back door and she looks really different. Now, the Bible uses a term, and I'm going to give you that right now. It says their countenance had fallen.
Yeah.
They looked sad.
Oh, yeah.
You could tell.
Oh, yeah.
You could tell there was something wrong.
Yeah.
Folks, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
People actually taking the time to see that there's something wrong. Maybe she walks in that Sunday disheveled. Maybe her hair's a mess. Maybe her clothes look half thrown on. Maybe you can tell there's something different.
Mm-hmm.
We need to be intentional.
Mm-hmm.
We need to pay attention. That's the first thing. That's the first thing. And it's huge because because many times you have these things that go on in our society and people say, well, if I only would have known. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, you live with the individual. How did you not know?
Oh, yeah. You talk to, like, okay, in the military, you know this, that the suicide rates in the military, it's ridiculous.
It is.
But when you study suicide and you listen to those things, people, when they look back and they say, well, I did notice that. And there were signs and there were clues.
That's right.
In fact, they train veterans now to look
for those clues.
So
And you think about that for just a second. The church is no different, folks.
Oh,
Again, we're getting together as people connected in this world that we're in.
Mm-hmm.
So look for the visible markers. Look for the down expression, the flat expression, expressionless. They're sitting there and they're just there. Their eyes are empty.
Mm-hmm.
They're just there.
Yeah.
Again, that emptiness is a clue.
Yeah.
Okay, how are you doing? How are things?
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to walk up to somebody, because again, that's the stigma.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, nobody, oh, wait a minute, they've got that.
Mhm.
It's not contagious.
Yeah.
The signs are there for us to help each other.
Yeah.
Because again, the Lord gave us hands and feet to be his hands and feet, right?
Yeah.
Hey, it's not just Ben's job. It's not just Tony's job.
Yeah.
We're here to care for each other.
Yeah.
And when we see that, yes, when they walk in the back door, absolutely look for those warning signs.
Yeah.
Look for that down expression, that flat expression. Look for all of a sudden the person not there.
Yeah.
That they're regular and all of a sudden they're not there. Or maybe they're brand new and they come in and you smell the odor of alcoholic beverage on them.
Yeah.
Self-medication is huge in our society.
Yeah.
Whether it's drug abuse or whether it's substance abuse or whether it's alcohol abuse, it's all substance abuse.
Yeah. Don't get
Don't get hung up.
beat 'em
No,
down.
don't beat them down, because they're self-medicating for a reason.
Yeah.
There's a reason they're doing what they're doing.
Sure.
Again, behavior is a reflection of the heart,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
That automatically that should show us they've got a need.
That's right.
They've got a need.
Yeah.
Okay.
Who doesn't have?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Can I add one to that? I'm not
Yeah.
trying to steal your thunder, but
No,
I
you're
think
good.
that especially in the church world, you said be aware,
Mhm.
be intentional, but I think we also have to be confidential.
That's right.
This
Absolutely.
is not to go on the church prayer list.
No.
And this is not to call you buddy or go on social media. This is if I'm talking to you about a
Yep.
need. Okay, let's keep it confidential.
Yep.
Right, because you start spreading, then what's going to happen?
That's right.
Other people aren't
That's
going
right.
to help.
That's
and
right.
this person's not going to come.
It breeds distrust.
It does.
It does. It
And we
breeds
can't
distrust.
do
Now,
that.
and we can't do it. We can't violate that. So the next step that you want to really think about, if you are the layperson, right? You're the deacon or you're the worship leader. You're someone that, and I've seen a lot of different congregations, and God always has those people there that are really the people. I mean, they're the ones that notice everything, right?
Yeah.
Where some people are not that way, and it's okay. It's just the way they're wired.
Yeah.
It's fine. But the thing is, though, when you see those kinds of things, the next step is point them the right direction, meaning exactly right. Find that pastor,
Mhm.
find that trained individual or that individual that will be able to sit down and have a conversation with them and truly find out what's going on. Because, yeah, you may feel like, you know what, I can't talk to them.
Mhm.
Okay, maybe you're not supposed to talk to them, but you can point them the right direction.
Yeah.
If God brought them into your field of view, then do something with that.
Yeah.
You know what? Hey, Mabel, I see something's wrong today. Are you okay? No, I'm really having a bad time right now. Well, hold on. Let's go get Jeff. Let's go get Pastor Jeff
Okay.
and go in and have a conversation with Pastor Jeff. And if you want me there, and again, I'm just laying out a scenario for you. If you want me there, I'll gladly sit right there with you if
Yeah.
you're okay with that. But if you don't, that's fine too, because I know Pastor Jeff, he's not going to talk to anybody. It's confidential. He's a minister. He's a pastor. It's confidentiality. But sit down and talk to him. I'm worried about you. I care about you. You see, sometimes we take that charge in Timothy where it says, you go and rebuke your brother,
Yeah.
right? When you see him in a sin, you go and rebuke your brother means we take it and we sort of beat him over the head with
Yeah, we
it.
don't
That's
do
not what that means. What that means, you go to him out of love,
Yeah.
out of concern. Mabel, I'm worried about you.
Yeah.
I see there's something wrong. I know your husband just died 6 months ago, and I see are you okay?
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? And
I'll
that's,
tell you what I do. I found that the best place to do that with men, maybe on a fishing boat,
yep,
on the way to a deer hunt.
that's right.
Something where, you're just hanging out and say, hey, you okay?
Yeah,
And what do you mean? Well, you all right? I've noticed that some things are going on. You've not been at church or, listen, man, I love you. If there's anything I can help you with, let me know. And all of a sudden, things
It
start
opens
opening
up.
Yeah.
right.
And I obviously we don't save people, but I think you save a brother.
No.
Or you save a sister.
You absolutely do,
You're-
because again, at the
They're
end
getting
of the
ready to
day,
fall into a pool.
that's
they don't
right.
wanna get
That's
in.
right. Exactly. You get stuck in that tar, it is really tough to get out of it.
So let's do this real quick. Let's we'll quickly talk about what we're calling this ministry, partnering with the Ohio Bible Institute, and we're going to call it. You tell everybody what we're going to call
Sure.
it, and then we're going to pause and then we're going to do a part 2 because I think we need to get into some more application because we're almost to 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Right. That's okay. That's okay.
Yeah.
Let's spend. We got some time. You got time to do that? So, tell people quickly what we're calling this ministry and the partnership with OBI and how we're going to use that, and then we'll come back on part 2 of this. It'll be podcast number 3, but we'll talk about application of it. We'll go through some more scriptures. We'll talk about some resources that we have available here in the state of Ohio and some others that we can get you plugged into because we really want to help some people mentally. So talk about what we're doing.
Sure. So this is actually the initiative that we've started is actually called the Gateway Initiative. And the Gateway Initiative, again, Ben and myself, and of course, obviously the Lord pointing, I think, again, the Lord is intentional in everything he does. He does nothing without having a point and a purpose. Brought us together for a reason, and we see the need. Both of us see the need. So with that, the Gateway Initiative was started from a standpoint of after a whole lot of prayer and following the Lord's guidance in it, that recognizing the need today that we truly need a biblical resource to help people to understand, number one, how do we recognize the problem? How do we break down the stigmatism that goes on within our congregations? And then finally, how do we, if needed, point them to resources that maybe you do need the next step or next level. And that's okay. Yeah. That's fine. But we've got folks and we've got a network of folks that we've got together that we can point you in that direction to help you.
Christian.
That's right. Christian, biblically based resources.
So and we'll talk about this in the next podcast, but really you're saying the Gateway is you're the doorway to say, hey, come to me. We can confidentially meet. And if you need this help, we can send you this way. If you need this help, we can send you this way. You have the resources available.
Well, and the other thing too, you brought up already. The next thing is if you need training, right? Maybe if it's a pastor says, you know what, I do have a dear sweet Mabel in my congregation. How do I help her? We want to, with OBI, we want to help train pastors in how to recognize these things, but how to feel comfortable going up and having that conversation. Yeah. So many times we don't approach those relationships because we don't feel comfortable. Folks, we sometimes have to be uncomfortable.
Sure.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
But we need to understand God's got us there for a reason.
Absolutely.
And we need to fulfill that role. We need to be part of that commission. And folks, that commission does not exempt mental illness.
That's right.
The commission is there for everyone, whosoever, right? He didn't put an excluder on there. Right. He said whosoever. So we need to understand that that's part of the whosoever.
That's right. So here's what we're going to do. This is episode 2. We're going to come back to episode 3. You'll be here, obviously, and we'll talk about some more application parts. But just to let everybody know that if you have questions, you can send to questions@ohiofw.org right now to do that. And the next one, we'll share about your contact and info and those things like that. We also have a location where we can share with you where you can meet and those things. But really, with the OBI, it's not just podcasts. We actually are putting together training classes. So we will bring you back and actually put some training material together for our churches, for our pastors. And that'll be a resource, whether we do it here to record it, and possibly you'll be available to go to some pastors.
Absolutely.
And
we need to do a workshop, whatever. Yeah.
I really do believe the Lord has opened the door. It's been a prayer of ours to help in this situation. I've talked to some other leaders where they're doing some things, and I want to partner with them on that as well. So, hey, it's been good to have you here on this first podcast, man. I think we could sit here for another 3 or 4 hours.
Oh, yeah.
But let's give the people a break, and then we'll come back.
Yep.
And again, remember to hit that like and subscribe button and follow us here on this podcast, and we will see you on episode 3.